In the late 60s and early 70s, there was a popular television show with an unforgettable musical theme. The show was called Mission Impossible. Every episode of that show was about the exploits of a small team of undercover agents who had the task of combating evil dictators and evil organizations and evil crime lords. Every episode would open the same way, with the head of the group receiving instructions for the next mission. The instructions came in the form of a hidden tape recorder and an envelope filled with photographs and descriptions of the situation. The tape recorder would always say, "Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is..." Then they would describe what needed to be done. The tape would continue with the reminder, "As always, should you or any of your force be caught or killed, the Secretary will disavow any knowledge of your actions. This tape will self-destruct in 5 seconds." Then, magically, smoke would come up from the tape, and indeed the message would be destroyed forever. Do you ever feel like you are on a mission impossible? That you have to accomplish what cannot be done? Yet we accomplish the impossible all the time, don't we? We accomplish the impossible because we didn't realize that it was impossible. Elbert Hubbard used to say, "No one can get very far unless they accomplish the impossible at least once a day." Jesus was the master of the impossible. That word was not in his vocabulary. Time after time, Jesus tells us that we too can do the impossible. Today he tells us, if you only have faith the size of a tiny mustard seed, you would say to this mulberry tree, "Be uprooted and planted in the sea," and it would. We can all do the impossible. Now, personally, I have not much interest in planting mulberry trees in the sea. But what about those proverbial impossible things in this world? What about, for instance, the elimination of world hunger? An impossible task, we might say. World hunger is an impossible situation. Our planet produces far more than we need. Yet even today, in the 21st century, there are 870 million people who are chronically undernourished. And 1 in 8 people is starving. That is a scandal. And at the same time, right here in America, we throw away nearly 50% of our food. We have developed a culture of waste, so that every year on the earth, more than 1.3 billion tons of food goes to waste. And meanwhile, 870 million people are starving. A few years ago, the Holy Father called together the leaders of the United Nations organization responsible for food and agriculture. In his address, he called out what he called financial speculation that treats food like any other commodity and affects its global price, as well as the tendency to look the other way when presented with troubling needs like hunger. Everyone, said the Pope, has the right to nutritious food. On the United Nations World and Environment Day, the Pope attacked food waste, saying, "Once upon a time, our grandparents were very careful not to throw away any leftover food." You remember those days? I certainly do. We were not allowed to leave anything on our plate. That generation had been through the Great Depression. That generation had been through at least one world war, and some of them 2 world wars. They knew what it was like to be deprived, and they never wasted a thing. What happened to those values? The Holy Father continues, consumerism has led us to become used to an excess and daily waste of food. Throwing away food, he says, is like stealing from the table of the poor and the hungry. Frank Gaines once said, "Only the one who can see the invisible can do the impossible." As a man of faith, Pope Francis is able to see the invisible, and so he has been able to make excellent strides in achieving the impossible. We too have the ability to do the impossible, if only we would open our eyes to see the invisible. When we open our eyes to see the invisible masses of starving children, when we open our eyes to the obscene waste of food right in our own backyard and all too often at our own tables and in our own kitchens, when we open our eyes to the invisible and not so invisible corruption of attitudes and policies which selfishly prevent the food from reaching the mouths of the poor, when we open our eyes to see the invisible force which some of us call God, that force which cements us all together as neighbors on the same planet, as children of the same God, as brothers and sisters to each other with real responsibilities one to the other, when we open our eyes to see the invisible, we too will accomplish the impossible. Your mission, my friends, should you choose to accept it, is to feed the hungry of this world. As always, should you or any of your force be caught or killed, God will never disavow knowledge of your actions. This message will never self-destruct, but will continue playing over and over, louder and louder, until the cries of hungry children cease, until the resources of this beautiful planet are distributed equitably, until starvation and hunger are forever erased from every forgotten corner of every land of the globe. This is our mission impossible. Together, we must make the mission possible.